You cried recently, maybe you know exactly when, maybe you don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe it was something huge, a loss, a goodbye, a moment of relief after months of holding it together, or maybe it was something embarrassing. A song, a commercial, a scene in a movie you've already seen 3 times, and for a split second after, you probably wondered why. Why does the human body respond to emotion by leaking fluid from its eyes? What does that even accomplish? And here's the question nobody thinks to ask. Did the first humans, the ones who lived in caves and hunted with stone tools and spent their nights terrified of the dark, did they do it too? The answer is yes. But the story of why changes everything you think you know about what tears actually are. Let's start with the biology, because it's stranger than you'd expect. All mammals cry. Your dog produces tears. So does a chimpanzee. So did every ancestor you've ever had. But those tears serve a clear physical purpose: lubrication, protection, flushing out irritants. That kind of crying is ancient, automatic, and shared across species. But emotional tears, tears triggered not by dust in your eye, but by a feeling inside your chest, those are different. Chemically different, structurally different. And as far as science can tell, almost exclusively human. In 1985, biochemist William Frey published the first serious scientific analysis of emotional tears. What he found surprised everyone. Emotional tears contain significantly higher concentrations of stress hormones than reflex tears, specifically adrenocorticotropic hormone, one of the key chemicals your body produces when you're under psychological stress. Frey's hypothesis was radical for its time. Crying is not a side effect of emotion, it is your body actively expelling stress. You don't cry because you're sad. You cry to get less sad. And there's more. A 2008 study published in the journal Cognition and Emotion found that after crying, people reported significant drops in both heart rate and cortisol levels. The body physically calmed down. Not because the problem went away, because the crying itself did something. Something chemical. Something ancient. Something your body was built to do long before there was any word for it. But here's where ancient humans enter the picture, and where it gets genuinely fascinating. Emotional crying requires something that most animals simply don't have. It requires what psychologists call a theory of mind, the ability to model another person's inner experience, to feel what they feel, to understand that something can be lost, that someone can be gone, that the future you imagined is no longer available to you. In other words, to cry emotionally, you have to be able to think emotionally. You have to know that loss is real, that it matters, that the person who was here yesterday and is not here today has left a hole in the world that didn't exist before. That is not a simple thought. Most animals never have it, and the evidence suggests our ancestors could do this far earlier than we ever assumed. In 2021, archaeologists working in a cave in Borneo discovered a painting of a pig. It was made with red ochre pigment. It was realistic, carefully executed, expressive, and it was at least 45,500 years old, making it the oldest known figurative artwork on Earth at the time of discovery. Think about what that means. Someone stood in a cave 45,000 years ago and painted an animal not because they had to, not because it kept them warm or fed them or protected them from predators. They painted it because they wanted to, because something in them needed to express what they saw in the world. That is not the brain of an animal. That is a mind that feels things deeply enough to recreate them. And the evidence for grief goes back even further. The oldest known intentional burial sites are at least 100,000 years old. Bodies placed carefully, positioned with what appears to be deliberate care, some with objects beside them, tools, pigment, in some cases what may have been flowers. At a site in Spain called Atapuerca, remains were found in a deep pit with a single beautifully crafted stone axe. A tool too perfect to be practical, placed there seemingly as an offering. You don't bury someone carefully if you don't feel something about their absence. You don't place a tool in a grave unless some part of you believes, or hopes, or needs to believe, that they might need it somewhere. Psychologist Paul Ekman spent decades studying emotional expression across cultures. He found that 6 core emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, produce the same facial expressions in every human culture on Earth, including isolated tribes with no contact with the outside world. These expressions are not learned. They are wired in, and the expression for sadness, the one that most often precedes tears, uses the exact same muscles in a remote village in Papua New Guinea as it does in a boardroom in Tokyo. It is older than any language, older than any civilization, older than agriculture or cities or written history. It is quite possibly older than our species itself. But here's what most people never think about. If crying is universal, if every human culture on Earth does it, if the same facial muscles activate in Tokyo and the Amazon and Papua New Guinea, then at some point in history the very first human cried for an emotional reason. Not because something got in their eye, not as a reflex, but because something happened and their body responded in a way it had never responded before. A new kind of pain, a new kind of loss, a feeling so large that the body needed to do something with it. We will never know who that person was. We will never know what they lost, or who they lost, or what the moment looked like. But it happened. Somewhere, a few 100,000 years ago, a human being sat with a feeling they had no words for, and something ran down their face. And someone else saw it, and moved closer. That's the key. That's the part that changes everything. In a small group, 10, 20, 30 people living and hunting and surviving together, emotional vulnerability was not weakness. It was communication. It was the most honest signal one human could send to another. I am not okay. I need you. Researcher Jonathan Rottenberg at the University of South Florida has studied the social function of tears for years. His conclusion is that crying evolved specifically as an attachment signal, a way of drawing other members of your group towards you at the moment you most needed them. Tears are disarming. They make aggression almost impossible. They trigger care in others the way almost nothing else does. Think about that mechanically. If you're in a group and someone threatens you, you can fight back or run. But if someone is crying, neither of those responses feels right. Something in the human brain short-circuits the aggression response when it sees tears. We are literally wired to stop and care. In the ancient world, a person who could signal distress and receive comfort was more likely to survive than one who suffered alone in silence. The people who cried were the people who stayed connected, and the people who stayed connected were the people who lived long enough to have children. Crying didn't make our ancestors weak, it kept them alive. And then there's the part that stays with you. In 2015, researchers studying the Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives, a species we once dismissed as primitive brutes, published evidence that they too buried their dead. Carefully. Deliberately. With what appears to be ritual. Neanderthals and modern humans shared a common ancestor roughly 600,000 years ago. We diverged. We developed separately, and yet independently, across hundreds of thousands of years and thousands of miles of separation, we both arrived at the same behavior. We both felt the need to honor the dead, which means grief, the emotion that produces the deepest, most uncontrollable tears most of us will ever experience, may not be a product of civilization at all. It may be something far older, something that runs so deep in the human lineage that even a separate branch of humanity arrived at it independently. Grief is not something civilization taught us. Grief is what we were before civilization existed. So the next time you cry, really cry, the kind you can't stop and can't explain and feel slightly embarrassed about afterward, remember this. You are not malfunctioning. You are not being weak. You are not being dramatic. You are doing something your ancestors did by firelight 100,000 years ago before language could carry what they needed to say. You are doing something evolution kept through every ice age and famine and catastrophe our species has ever survived, because it worked. It kept people together. And being together was the only reason any of us are here at all.